Hello and welcome to the IdeaCast interview series, episode number 60. My guest in this episode is Eilaina Velan, and she graduated from the University of Pittsburgh, Swanson School of Engineering with a degree in chemical engineering. And during her time in university, she focused on sustainability and entrepreneurship. After she graduated, she had spent 2 years as a chemical and process engineer at a Pittsburgh area company that develops and builds supercritical carbon dioxide extraction and energy equipment. So we're going to find out a lot about Eilaina's career as an engineer, and she started her own company called Advanced Control Systems, which she runs with one other person. And in this interview, we'll be discussing her academic work, her career, and we will then transition over into talking about family and mental health. And so I am going to go ahead and say that this conversation was created with the intention of making an impact on persons, women who are Eilaina's age and younger, so from early 30s into women who are just starting into college. And so it's a little bit more of a convergent focus in that regard. But nonetheless, if you like human interest stories, I would highly recommend sticking around and enjoying this conversation. So, and I do thank you if you listen to this conversation all the way through. Eilaina is a wonderful person, and I enjoyed speaking to her very much. So thank you and enjoy. And I'd like to welcome Eilaina Velan to the IdeaCast interview series. I'm very much looking forward to this conversation. I'd like to also welcome the YouTube audience. And to give you a little preview, we are going to be talking a lot about just basic human interest and things that hopefully you guys can relate with and connect with. That's my intention in this conversation. So, Eilaina, welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I will also confess to the audience that we had a pre-meet last week and we spent 2 hours chatting away. So we're going to go right into a flow conversation, and I really appreciate that we were able to have that opportunity last week to do that, because I learned a lot about you, and I want to bring that back into the conversation. So in that spirit, I would like to go ahead and we'll start up with a sort of educational academic background, and we'll segue over into where you find yourself now in your career. So fire away. What do you got?
Well, it all started September 1st, 1991.
I should have dramatic background music.
Right.
Wah.
Exactly.
Anyways.
But no, really, I went to the University of Pittsburgh for college. I studied chemical engineering. I started in biomedical engineering. I was really interested in tissue engineering, regenerative medicine. But I ended up falling into chemical engineering just based on course load and the outlook for career opportunities. I can't say that I did that all myself. My father was my mentor. He was my best friend. He really put it into my head at a very, very young age when he found me disassembling and reassembling our vacuum cleaners over and over again at home.
I love it.
He really said, you're going to be an engineer. And, whether there's a negative or a positive from that, growing up, I always just kind of had it in my mind that was my destiny. My dad, being an engineer himself, electrical engineer, also went to Pitt. So I had a lot of, I didn't really have much of a desire to go anywhere else. I kind of really wanted to follow, in my dad and his footsteps. So I was really lucky also because my dad was also volunteered for the freshman engineering program at Pitt for many years. Where industry professionals would be called on. There was this mock conference that freshman engineers put together every year with certain research projects. And the idea is to get the engineers at Pitt to explore the facet of engineering that they're most interested in.
Okay.
My dad, about 16 years, he participated in that. And it finally came time that I was one of those freshman engineers. Of course, he wasn't my mentor.
Okay.
They made sure that didn't happen. But if it weren't for my dad, I would not have gotten through engineering school.
Right.
There's certainly so many engineers that don't make it through the weed out process,
Okay.
not because they're not capable, but because it seems maybe too far-fetched, or you don't feel adequate enough, or it may just seem too far apart, from who you are as a person, with all of the course load and the work. So there was certainly a lot of self-doubt through that. And again, just having my dad there is indispensable,
Okay.
really. So, and following college, I ran a couple victory laps. I spent about 6.5 years in school. And a lot of that wasn't just academics. I had some other things going on at home that unfortunately kind of prolonged that my tenure, I guess my time at the university. And then upon graduating, I got a job with a local company here in Pittsburgh. After 6 months, they ended up hiring me into their sister company. And I was with them for a little over 2 years. And since then, I departed and started my own company. So that's kind of the nutshell, on engineering, where I started, why I started, and where I am now.
Yeah. And I want to pin something here for the audience that you had mentioned in your 6.5 years of getting your degree, that there were domestic matters that as a committed family person that you had to attend to. So we'll pin that. And I want to get back to that in a later part of the conversation. But to the audience, sure. I think I'm not enticing you, but right. urging you to stick around, because this is part of why I brought Eilaina on is just, again, it's a very human story, and I want to share that with you guys. So you've got your own consultant. It's called Advanced Consultancy, or if that's the right term, and it's Advanced Control Systems. And correct. You have one other person, which I think the story to that is interesting. And maybe we're at a point where we could share that your father, who was an engineer and an inspiration and a mentor to you, that this business that you currently have is an extraction from the business that he had. Would you share some of that with us?
Absolutely. My father wouldn't be what you consider a brick and mortar. My dad was my dad. And growing up, watching him and kind of shadowing him, and not only his company, but I've been along the ride with him during the tremendous success and during the tremendous fallout. That being said, my dad was stoic in every sense of the word. He was determined, and what he left me, beyond tremendous amounts of memories and just numerous lessons and knowledge, is he left me with his network. Some of these people I had never met in person. I just knew them by name. From hearing conversations with my dad and so on and so forth. And one of those people that was really loyal, and also the last employee that my dad had, his name is Wayne Reese, a very talented automation engineer. He was actually a Pitt student, and my dad hired him as a co-op through their Pitt co-op engineering program. And when he graduated, my dad kept him on. He was with my dad for about 25 years. Just an excellent worker. When you're in a situation where you're hiring engineers, you certainly want someone that, can pick up and, take new knowledge and new problems and just take off with them. And that's certainly who Wayne is. Okay. I was lucky in the sense that when my father passed away, I won't say this wasn't the lucky part, but my father passed away, no one was prepared for this. Yeah. So, within a week or two of my father passing away, I reached out to Wayne. I had never met Wayne before. I don't even know what Wayne looks like at that point. Yeah. And I had this crazy idea, and I had to think about it pretty quickly. Because I knew that Wayne was an asset. It is an asset, and I didn't want him to slip through my fingers. Yeah. Mainly because I know what he meant to my father and what he meant to my father's company. And I also know that Wayne's situation, he prefers to have a little freedom. So working for a smaller company offers him that freedom and that lifestyle. So I sat down in a coffee shop. Luckily, I found the right guy sitting at a table. I didn't walk up to some random person.
Yeah, could have been a whole different outcome, right?
It absolutely could have been. I could be in a very different place than I am right now. In a nutshell, I told him, I said, Wayne, I have this crazy idea. So I'm not going to take over my dad's company. I said, there's far too much debt and there's too much that I would not want to take on.
Mm-hmm.
I said, but I would like to migrate the history and start my own company.
Mm-hmm.
So my dad's company was Applied Control Systems, and my company is Advanced Control Systems. That was very strategic, purposely.
I'd say so.
Yeah, there's a lot of ACSs out there, but when you really start to look in the engineering ones, my dad's company was very well known at one time, so I didn't want to lose that. That also being said, just kind of a fun story. The logo that my dad had was almost looks like a heartbeat sensor, right? And it was red, and it just said ACS on it. Well, I took that logo. I hired a graphic designer, and I had them rework it. So I'm really happy to at least have a similar connection. Not only just in name, but also in image, and updated it. My dad focused a lot on petrochemicals and steel industry, kind of like dirty kind of processes. And I'm a little different in the sense that I'm more of a sustainable engineer. I also went to engineering school around the time that sustainability really, really was getting a lot of traction. So kind of also showing that history, not only in the name, but in the logo, to be moving more towards this sustainable, technology and, earth conscientious company. So that's that's the story of Wayne, and how I got to where I am. I really every chance that I get, I tell Wayne how much I appreciate him. If there was anything that I could do in this life to repay the opportunity that he gave me, just out of sheer trust for a complete stranger, for your previous boss's daughter.
Right.
It's to have that kind of confidence in me, where I lacked that confidence, is honestly what gave me that push forward. Because at that point, it wasn't just me, it was Wayne. I'm not doing this for me, I'm doing this for Wayne too. So that it really was a lot of motivation there.
I wouldn't be surprised if Wayne in his mind was thinking, well, I worked with the father, and you obviously earned your stripes through going through engineering school and becoming a chemical engineer, that he intuited. I'm sure that there would be synergy there, and there would be continuity, et cetera, moving forward. But nonetheless, that is a great anchoring or grounding for you and for him to continue on, but for you to step into something, into the unknown, as it were, even though you have a lot of the things in place, but nonetheless, it's still a gamble, which again, women in entrepreneurship, women in leadership was the sort of the themes I had in mind with entering into conversation with you. And I think one thing that prompted you to get into where you are is that in the time that you had between school and this company, that you basically hit a wall, or as you say, a glass ceiling, with advancement in the companies that you were, the previous companies that you are working for. So it makes perfect sense that you take the reins, and there are no ceilings when you own your own business, unless you create them for yourself, right?
Exactly. And just to kind of elaborate that on a little bit, this company that I had my job right out of college, my dad always said that, you never really know what you like to do until you just start to work in industry. And that's definitely true, I think, especially when it comes to engineering, because you're not really sure what you're going to do. But that being said, I was very lucky with that company, because they were more or less in a startup, fast pace, changing markets. And I came in at a point of growth. I came in, I was one of 2 engineers, and there were 25 employees.
Mm-hmm.
By the time I left, there were 8 engineers and over 100 employees in multiple states.
Okay.
And so it was very rapid growth within a couple of years. But I was very fortunate to have had the opportunity to wear multiple different hats, to learn as much as I can in every aspect of the business and process engineering, not only the equipment and, ironically enough, the process automation and control, which historically, that's really what the crux of my dad's company was.
Mm-hmm.
And I hate computer programming.
Okay.
It was my least favorite thing.
Tedious.
It very tedious. And it's just, for me, it wasn't quite logical.
Okay.
It was almost a language. And I'm talking
Yeah.
more or less, like your C++ and,
Mm-hmm.
Things like that. But so working at this company and having this exposure as a process engineer to be the person that's programming the machine and seeing the machine behave when you give it command was really encouraging. And that's really what made me understand wholly what my dad did.
Okay.
Which is kind of ironic because then I started to get interested in it and I realized the power of controls and engineering. So taking that knowledge and taking that understanding, which I gained really from my whole life, just watching my dad and following him around, I knew my potential. Then that's not something you probably typically hear me say, but when you look back, there's again a certain time when you realize that you can spread your wings a lot more. And so I had been thinking of a while, hitting this glass ceiling. The opportunities to kind of get into other aspects of the business were becoming fewer and far between. The management was getting very top heavy. And it was just not necessarily the kind of environment that I felt like I was contributing to my full potential.
Okay.
So already kind of thinking about this, nothing against the company, just, really feeling like maybe it's time to move on.
Sure.
And that's, around the same time that my dad passed away. So I spent 6 months after my dad died. I actually found out that he passed away while I was at work. That's the other benefit of working for a smaller company is you do make really, really close relationships with the people that you work with. And although it was a very tragic experience, I can recall every second of it, finding that information out and just remembering everybody that I connected with in that building came to my side. And so, just the power of people in that sense. But that being said, I stayed another 6 months and just to kind of prepare the paperwork and get things together. Eventually put in my 2 weeks notice and I just took off running. I didn't know where to start. I had no idea, I don't know anybody. And, luckily, I said some of my dad's friends and colleagues who some of them even knew me prior were really offering and to connect me and network with other people. So I didn't quite have difficulty finding my first job. I was very lucky in that sense. But as time goes and relationships change and expertise and some people leave companies, it definitely changes. But I certainly have never looked back. I like the fact that my problems are not somebody else's problems right now. And also the freedom to be more flexible, with the schedule and also feel, a sense of accomplishment. And I know that not everybody, will find a sense of accomplishment in the path that I took. And, same goes for me and others. But I always knew at some point in my life I wanted to work for myself. I never in my wildest dreams thought it was going to be so fast, quick, and dirty.
Yeah.
And I don't say that in a bad way. I mean, I didn't have any time to put this together. And I almost feel like I was doing it kind of autonomously. It was just kind of happening naturally. So I don't think that I will ever go back, or to a situation where, I don't have that freedom, at least to work for myself.
Mm-hmm.
I know that that's not everybody's path, but it's certainly somewhere that I have found, I have found my way forward. So.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can relate to that because I've identified as chronically self-employed for the last 23 years, starting around the turn of the century or whatever, that I've just had my own little businesses, and and I'm getting rid of my current business, and I'll be fully unemployed in May, and it's like, ooh, and I don't care what happens, I've got some cushion money to keep me through the summer, and I'm just not in a hurry, so, but the idea of going and getting a job is like,
right.
Right,
exactly,
right,
exactly.
So yeah, it's a different vibe when you can, and there's different risks and everything is different, good and bad. So you've been at just about a little over 2 years with ACS, as itself.
So August will be 4 years.
4 years, okay.
Yeah, so it's crazy how fast time goes. The 4-year anniversary of my father's death is in about a month, actually.
Okay.
The end of next month. So,
okay.
And that's, I know that's a really bad way of gauging time, but you throw in that monumental, life, event, and then a few months later, COVID, just gets introduced. So I think we're all kind of stuck in this weird, what happened to 2.5 years of my life kind of thing. I know.
And you always hear people say, where were you when Kennedy was shot? Where were you when, those old people, when the moon landing took place? And for my generation, it was when Reagan was shot, which isn't that, not quite as Kennedy-esque in its drama, but it was nonetheless significant, so we all have, or 9/11. I mean, most people, under or over 35 or whatever, remember that. So anyway, but that should not be discounted, that this is a means of anchoring yourself to the history of your life and significance of what happened, and the pivotal nature of it too. I mean, look what you did in that few short months between his passing and your bringing this new iteration of ACS into its incarnation. So I'll ask you one other question related to that, and then I want to get kind of Oprah Winfrey on you, and I want to get you turned into an inspirational speaker. But what is your vision for ACS in terms of growth? Do you want to just keep it yourself and Wayne, or do you really see yourself, expanding, or how are you visioning that right now for yourself?
Yeah, so there's certainly a little bit to unpack there. As in, an entrepreneur, pivoting is key. Being able to be flexible, is really important when it comes to directing sales and things like that. I know that I don't have the personal experience in automation to be doing really full-scale automation without learning or needing, to learn more, go to certain classes. And that's the interesting thing about automation, is that unless you were involved in it heavily every day, you are not going to be able to keep up with the very rapid changes in technology and language and syntax and things of the sort. That being said, I try to think, well, if I were to keep this company going, as an automation process, process automation controls company, which is really what I consider myself at my core. By me, I mean ACS. And well, actually, I guess that does translate to me too. But it's you're in a situation of, I need to hire somebody that's good at what I'm not good at.
Yeah.
Wayne's excellent. If I could learn how to make more of Wayne's, that's the key. That's my secret sauce.
Get a CRISPR. Well, no, not CRISPR, but get some kind of GNA. Start making little Wayne.
Cloning him. And he laughs every time I tell him that. But I really am serious, because when I started ACS, I had to start with what I knew. I had to start with, it wasn't that much in the grand scheme of, automation technology, but I knew a language and I knew how to apply it. And really what I started to learn, which really was kind of what my dad was alluding to so often, is that there's a massive talent gap in process automation and control, mainly because a lot of our industrial manufacturing and, operations, things that people really don't consider, as you turn your light on and you get immediate power. No one's really thinking about where that power comes from.
Mm-hmm.
The workers and the employees that programmed these systems, and a lot of companies are still using 30-plus-year antiquated control systems.
Okay.
That knowledge base and those employees and workers are either retiring or dying off.
Mm-hmm.
So you have this
Okay.
massive talent gap there with younger people coming in, and their task is to debug a program that is integrated with multiple other companies, maybe in different languages, and that sometimes that language or that specific data structure has to be completely rewritten because the person that knows it is no longer existing.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So that being said, that was my initial thought, with ACS, is how do I train and, kind of start bringing this talent back.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say that that's still a priority of mine, but it has kind of taken a little bit of a backseat. And in that sense, I'm more or less stuck in a situation of how do I sell a company versus selling myself?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to say stuck in the sense of I don't know where to move. It's more or less I'm at this pivotal point right now of I know what I offer and what I can give. How do I bridge that from, selling myself and my knowledge to expanding my, employees or my offerings or so on and so forth. I haven't quite figured that out yet.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's definitely a work in progress. But what I can say with ACS is that I will always own that, and it will always be my baby, because I can make ACS anything that I want it to be.
Yeah.
And that's that's one of the beautiful things about business. And I mean, of course, you don't want to not have a direction, because then, where are you going at that point?
Yeah.
But it's really just finding the need and trying to address it where I can and what capacity I have.
Mm-hmm.
So, the dream is for ACS to operate autonomously, with a heavy lean into automation and education.
Mm-hmm.
Where I see myself moving forward is kind of changed really in the past few years, and comes with different opportunities. I was solely an engineer for ACS, as well as the accountant and the sales and the marketing department.
Different hats, yeah.
Oh yeah, and I have to say I apologize for my website, because it was certainly just I put it together with a template. So other than that,
yeah.
It's there's certainly some things that I have learned about myself, and I'm still sorting those out, I think,
Mm-hmm.
just to kind of parse out and fully understand. But I really would like myself to have not only ACS in the background, constantly working, in addressing more manufacturing needs. I want it to be more of a sustainable push, or even if it's just a landing spot for sustainability technology or education.
Mm-hmm.
And whether I remain as involved as an engineer with ACS or not, of course, is yet to be seen. I will always have engineers. And if I were to put out, well, where do I see myself going? It's I have a very, I don't say very recent, but in the past few months, I joined a local company here in Pittsburgh, a robotics and automation company, which ironically was right across the street from my dad's office building, and I had no idea it was there.
Oh, that's neat.
Yeah. It is really neat. And of course, consulting with them, and their technology is very different from anything I've worked with, but I've had this reinvigorated problem solving, energy to say, hey, I really like being able to brainstorm about ideas and look at market trends, and I call it product realization, because that's the name of an entrepreneurial class I took through the engineering school at Pitt.
Okay.
But that's kind of what I see is bringing something that, maybe new to me, or, new to an industry, and kind of disrupting it and innovating it. So I know that's kind of is a very vague answer to your question. I wish I had more of a solid answer. At the same time, I really think that that's the beauty of it. Of course, you can talk to many entrepreneurs, and especially I think people that have worked in startups, and having your goal and your product and your target audience is so critical. I think the difference with a consulting and engineering firm is you don't really have a product. You're in the service industry.
Yeah.
Of course, I sell things. I can resell, I can build control panels, and I can put those things together for people. But you're still in the you're always going to be looking for the next opportunity. And hopefully in consulting, over the years you build your relationships with enough people that you have some pretty decent repeat customers, and then it becomes a little bit easier. So it's definitely a process. I am not, at first I was certainly much more anxious and nervous that I couldn't find the one direction. I couldn't find the one thing that was really going to be lucrative, or was going to be that next thing. I certainly just throw shit at a wall just to see what sticks.
Right.
And that's, it's certainly not sustainable in the long run. But the idea is that take this time now, this energy now, and this, this, I would say freedom, but, everything that you've got going on right now, and just keep moving forward. And really just, I have this gut feeling in a weird way that something will, whatever's supposed to work out will. And of course, your logical brain's like, you can't rely on your gut. How many times?
No, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, but to be a fatherly preacher type for a moment, it's like you have to have the imaginal in that amalgamation of ideas. So you have the control system literally in your head, but also the imaginal person that throws the shit at the walls and says, I'm seeing something here, and something's congealing for me, and yada yada. So absolutely. In fact, when you were talking, I was thinking Allied Comprehensive Services, that's another ACS, and that's sort of a expansion of its possibility, right? So Allied, there are things coming together, and comprehensive, so it's just another thought cloud that you can throw up for yourself.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I totally agree. I mean, you got to be able to just and I've only known you a couple hours collectively, but I mean, you strike me as a creative person, obviously very intelligent, and so the rest is just letting the sands of time kind of tick away while you're engaged in this dance of caution, yet imagine, as the Disney people call it, imagineering. I worked for Disney for a while, and a lot of it was I was telling you that before they started, right? They were just always like in play mode, and so, but it's so true, you have to have that. And they have literally dozens and dozens of people making good salaries at Disney coming up with stuff. They're throwing shit at walls, and so absolutely. Absolutely.
You're definitely hit the nail on the head. There's, you have to exercise both the right brain and the left brain.
Yeah, exactly.
You really do. Some people, of course, when you get in, I think, you have to have a certain personality to be a CEO, I think. And for instance, I have a friend that, is a co-founder of another local company in Pittsburgh, and he hired a CEO basically to do the things he was uncomfortable doing. And that's making those hard financial decisions, kind of having to be the stick in the mud, when it comes to certain things. So that's not to say that, of course, you like a super creative person, or a non-super creative person, would find themselves in, in those employment opportunities. But it really is a balance, I think, that's important to maintain.
Yeah. You can talk about division of labor, and then there's a sort of meta division of labor where the collective minds and the different psyches that are coming together.
Yeah.
And like you said, and there's these videos on YouTube, my wife watches them, and it's like one woman will be at a table with like 3 iterations of herself, and there's the neurotic one self, there's the dreamer romantic self, and then there's the real prick self that's like so that's cute. I always love those analogies, and I think that works. But yeah, you really, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you have to wear those different hats and be responsible for every aspect of that in creation. But like I have faith that'll not be too much of a problem for you. Just, you got to trust in yourself and have some level of esteem and confidence that, you can navigate it and get through that. So absolutely. I say it with sincerity. And so in that spirit, I was mentioning a moment ago, I'll go all Oprah Winfrey on you, and you're going to go all inspirational speaker on myself and the audience. So what I would ask is, as a woman entrepreneur, if you had a room with 10 women who are educated and they're in their early 20s and they're just getting started, what would we bring to them? You rather, I mean, I'll just be sitting there smiling while you do it. But yeah, what would you want to say to a group of young women who are going to have a great future if they could just get that sort of mentorship nudge? What would you think you'd want to say to them?
Absolutely. Of course, there's many things to talk about. I would probably start it, along the lines of nobody really knows what they're doing. I heard that at first when I really started to get into, running a business, and, I get really nervous. I said, but I don't know what to do. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to do that. Why am I even trying if it's not something that I've ever done before? Is this the best allocation of my time and energy? And really, yes, there's the logical and the, you're thinking of money, cash flow, and you're thinking of how in the world am I going to pay my mortgage? To kind of turn off that noise is really important. It's ongoing practice. I'm sure some people are a lot better at it than others.
Sure.
But I really would say that don't expect to know things. One of the best things that my dad ever taught me, and I know I've told this to you before, but where you can't see, you feel. And there's me, doing this all over the place, trying to figure it out. But it really, you have to learn to trust your gut. And I think when it comes to the professional, there's professional jobs, for women are much different than they were 20, 30 years ago. We're seeing a lot more, women at least just getting into the engineering field, which is really exciting. At the same time, I think that it balances out, the different, I don't want to say gender roles, but typically, you get, some males are better at certain tasks and some females are better at other tasks. And so it's not only encouraging to, see that trend, but also to encourage those women that are kind of getting in, swimming with the sharks or getting into a highly male dominated, career field, is that not to let that kind of get to you. I think there's a lot of talk about, the how great that is. And of course, there's a lot of, resources out there. And for instance, being designated as a woman-owned small business, there's certainly benefits that you can find in that. But I don't want to say but, because everything that comes before the but is bullshit. I'd say in addition that it's, you have to be your own best friend, and you really can't be your own worst enemy. Okay. Of course, having that balance of thought in your brain, I think will, help kind of, give you a little bit of clarity. But, what I really suggest is to find somebody you trust. Find somebody that is close to you, that you can just call up in the middle of the day or wait till the end of the day in tears if that's what you need. I think the big thing as well is you feel very much alone in many endeavors, and certainly reminding yourself that you're not alone, and maybe having that sounding board on the other end to remind you of things that maybe you can't see in yourself because you missed a deadline or your boss is, expected something of you or whatever it is. It's, beyond foregoing, the notion that you're going to know exactly what to do. It's also making sure that you really have that support system. And also I'm still learning this myself. I really think the third thing is having that work-life balance. And I know everybody talks about it. I know that it's a big, it's a big deal. And the one thing I can say is that nobody can tell you what your work-life balance is going to be. Only you can.
Okay.
It's, sometimes some people operate on 3 hours of sleep, and they can get a whole bunch more done. Don't compare yourself to that. That has been my biggest challenge. I think in the long run, I have absolutely terrible self-confidence and self-esteem.
Okay.
So working through that and kind of, if I'm not that person at that time to remind myself that I'm capable, or that how I'm thinking about this one event or this one negative, maybe one negative thing happened to me, I could really find myself in this spiraling situation of, that's it, I'm done. Why am I even going to try? I tried, I failed, I tried, I failed. And, in accordance with what I said earlier, you do have to be your own best friend, but in instances, you have to realize that you maybe not be able to be your own best friend in that situation. So take yourself out of it and reach for your support. I think that it's not really so much, more or less business advice. It's more or less, I think you have to learn about how to navigate yourself and how we perceive this world in order to be successful. And success is, a different definition for everyone.
Sure. No, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. I think, again, one of my motives in this conversation and bringing you on board is to reach out and to inspire not just women, but young business people. But I'm more interested in young women entrepreneurs. In fact, the interview I did prior to our conversation was an 18-year-old woman in the UK, and she started her own film company.
Oh, wow.
And it was just so lovely. And she's got talent. She's obviously starting out, but you can see in just a couple of short films that she made where her creativity is showing up in that for an 18-year-old. So I'm handicapping it just a little bit, but because I see potential. In fact, after the interview, I reached out to her and we had a good experience. And I said, listen, I want to pitch something to you. I want to pitch an idea to you. And absolutely, anytime you can say no, and I'll be in the background. I just want to be a writer for this. But I'd love to work for her, to inspire her to do a documentary for her age group, for her peer group, and ask some real deep questions, like 3 questions for 3 people in her peer group. And then bring in somebody a little bit older, maybe like a postgrad in psych or Phil of Mind or something like that, to circle with them. And so this young lady who's doing the filmmaking can ask the questions initially, we'll get the response, bring them into a circle, and have somebody again who can ground things, who's had a few years of this kind of deep thinking stuff.
Right.
And create a circuit there. And so it would be an anchoring point for them in their lives when they're 18 to 20 years old. And then when they're 40, they can look back and go, well, either what was I thinking, or God, I really had a light on inside, So anyway, I'm rambling on a tangent, but this is the kind of thing that I like to do is to help in my own tiny little ways to plant a seed with her to get that done. And again, I'm staying out of it. I'll just offer any suggestions I can, but if she wants to do it, and she said, yeah, I'm busy right now, but so I'm going to send her a thing, whatever it is, a pitch, and I'm going to do, lots of little clips and things like that from stuff. But anyway, so that's my motive, is to try to just plant seeds with people. And as I mentioned to you, I've got a Facebook page and and I'm going to say, if you have a daughter that's 16 or 18 or 24, watch this video. It's important. And so just to show my cards a little bit there. So maybe this is unless if you have any other things you want to fit into that, because then we'll transition over to something a little more personal, a little more family oriented.
Sure. I can say that there are a couple more things about entrepreneurship and that the journey to kind of start working for yourself, or not even working for yourself, feeling confident in your career and yourself. And certainly another thing that my dad taught me, which came to mind, is that the mark of a good engineer is not an engineer that can sit down and recall every equation that they ever learned or looked at. It's being able to know where to go and find the answers.
Mm-hmm.
And that is so critical. And I can tell you that I struggled with that again, because my boss at my previous job, I mean, he was, when it came to numbers and equations, I remember the first time sitting down with him, watching him do this. And I thought to myself, I called my dad up after work and we got a beer. And I was close to tears. And I said, Dad, I'm not like him. I said, yeah, I understand math, but when it comes to recounting and you going through all of these equations and heat transfer calculations, I said, I'd have to look at a book and I'd have to remind myself. And he said, well, that's normal. And I think without having that from my dad or somebody that had that kind of experience, not only as an engineer himself, an employee himself, but also as a business owner and somebody that hired people.
Yeah.
And I've really, really held on to that. So it's, that's certainly something else that I would say. And, also just don't be afraid to try, because you never know what you're going to miss out on if you don't try.
Yeah. Yeah. And one thing I love to poo-poo our techno age, but I have to say that your generation and everyone's generation that's invested, but people coming up, that the immediacy and the availability of support groups a la the interwebs,
right,
is such a power, such a, there's so much shadow, but there's so much power in this that you can connect and collaborate with people all over the world or, in your region. Whereas, I'm old enough to remember the 80s and the 70s before the internet and watching my parents' generation. And basically you put up a piece of paper at the local co-op, like women warriors wanted, and you get together and form a little coven of people, and collaborate that way and help each other out that way. And I lived it because it was that 70s, first iteration of self-help, you can do it kind of stuff. And so, and my mother would go to those things and I drag me there. And so they're like, women just doing stuff, and it's so cool. It was so powerful, but now it's on the internet. And so I think that's an evolutionary step forward, I guess, to say that is that, so if I were to put just a little, an aside to what you're saying, that, thank God for that, because, that's going to make a big difference too, to reach out, find support in that regard, because, notes stuck on pin boards at the local food co-op might not.
Right. They might resonate as well.
Right. It's just for work, right? Yeah. It's like harder to do. And then you got to go to the place where you rent the room and, then you got to drive home and so, but I mean, just to be able to get on and have, even if it's just a Facebook page or whatever it is, a forum somewhere or this kind of stuff with Zoom. And it's just awesome that's available. In fact, you did a podcast with women in automation, right? And so the lady who was hosting you even said, it was like, how many of us are there?
Yeah, right.
Like, so niche, but you know what? I mean, it's there and it's happening. Yeah. And I read a statistic the other day because I was curious. I was like, how many people get their PhDs in physics in the United States alone every year? And it's 2,000 people. I'm like, holy shit, that's a lot of people. I figured, a couple hundred, 2,000 people a year get their PhD. And so it's not so niche, and or maybe it is for certain disciplines, but I just picked physics as an example, and it's like, wow, that's a lot of people. It's a lot of people every year. So anyway, well, thank you so much for that, Sage, because in our 2-hour conversation last week, I was, and not to fan your ego or anything, but I was impressed that you, and this may sound ageist, but in your age range, you have some wisdom, and it's not beyond your years. You just have wisdom, and you have a sense of moxie that I see. And I don't know if I have moxie, but I'm a pig-headed, stubborn, obsessive person. That's the only thing that got me through 5 businesses or whatever I've owned in my life that I didn't necessarily fail, and none of them went out of business, but they, weren't great success. Anyway. I did it through bullheaded stubbornness, but I think you've got a finesse and obviously intelligence again, and you're put together, and I think that's awesome. So that's, again, one of my reasons why
Thank you.
yeah, well, again, I'm saying it objectively. And so this is a good segue to get into some family history and where
Yeah.
you come from, because as we were talking about in our conversation last week, adversity is the crucible or the fire in which we find ourselves being resilient, being these strong characters, and there's neurosis behind it too, but
Oh yeah.
yeah, we'll sort all that out.
Oh yeah.
So let's talk, and this is probably still, I can keep my Oprah hat on there. Let's talk about family and talk about some of the hard stuff, because if we have the attention of some young women here, I think this is part and parcel of that success story, is to say, you know, be inspired by the good stuff and be inspired by people who have been put through challenges. So I'll hush, get you going on that.
Yeah. You know, I think the best way to kind of conveniently deliver that history in a package is my parents. I'm trying to think where to start. So my father and my mother decided to have kids later in life. Mm-hmm. It was really in their late 30s, and my sister was born in 1987, and then in 1988 my dad was diagnosed with an inoperable brain tumor. He was not expected to survive. That's besides the point. But those 3 years, you know, he ended up surviving. He got an innovative surgery, and he never had a reoccurrence of the tumor. But there was a period of time, you know, with the treatments and the surgeries and things that kept them from having another kid. So already knowing that, you know, I mean, older parents, I can't say, I think older parents kind of experience things that they want to do before having kids. And my parents were very, very, you know, much, you know, suited that mold. They did a lot of international traveling. My dad was working really hard with the company that he was with then. And unfortunately, when I was born, I believe was kind of as I've learned from the history, it was kind of the start of the fallout. I can't say mental illness is definitely known to run on my mom's side of the family. They're also Irish, so I think that there was more of a, you know, an openness in a way to kind of accept that as a possibility when it comes to actually discussing it rather than sweeping it under a rug. That's a completely different story. And then my dad came from a very German family, which, you know, it was not, you know, his father, you know, came over when he was in the first grade. So there really wasn't any acceptance, but I do believe that there was some mental illness also that, you know, existed in that family. So my mom and my sister, you know, certainly have had their struggles, you know, over the years. And I have to say that I'm a little bit lucky in a sense that I didn't have that same exact genetic makeup. But what it did do is it created, and I can't say, it's not that I don't struggle with depression or anxiety or, you know, the occasional, you know, I guess emotional, you know, crying or whatever it is. And I say that difficult because growing up, I learned to pack my emotions away and to compartmentalize them. So now traversing through this grief process, I'm starting to learn that emotions are okay and that you have to experience them. So just to throw in that little, you know, tidbit of information, but it was really all about survival. There was, you know, I don't want it to sound like it was all bad, but I can say the majority of it was really difficult. There was, my mom also suffers from hoarding. So not only was the emotional environment very tumultuous, so is the physical environment, where you physically feel like your walls are closing in on you.
Okay.
So without to get into too much of the nitty-gritty details, as a young kid, I can remember just the weight of the world on my shoulders. And some of the first memories I have are, how do I fix this?
Yeah.
You become a fixer. You really do. And at the same time, and I don't know if I don't think this is unique to me. But what I can say is I felt that I was the problem.
Mm-hmm.
I was even told that multiple times. I can say that certainly when my mom's said things that she doesn't always recall that she says them, I think, there was certainly, her head was in a different space. But, I was at a very young age, I was told that I was supposed to be conceived in a centrifuge. So hearing that as a child, I mean, before even the age of 10, and you kind of try to digest that as, wait, I was supposed to be a boy. I'm not what my dad wanted. And really so there's a lot kind of that fed into that, and which really, I think, made me kind of feel like it was my job to fix things. And when something was wrong, I always felt like it was my fault. So even if it was something that had completely nothing to do with me. There's, I'd say, fast forward a little bit, puberty hit. I think every young girl that hits puberty just, there's a wave of emotion and, and things that just kind of hit you that you don't always know how to communicate or to deal with. I'd say that was really when my difficulty with my mom really kind of hit ahead.
I bet,
It was, I also started to reject the, I guess, the lifestyle and what I was given. I started to question it, and I really got angry. For the first time in my life, I felt animosity deep in my bones, just so deep. And then, of course, with some events and things happening during that time, it just further made me want to distance myself from my mom. And I still want, she's my mom. I find that the lack of attention that I didn't get from her was certainly made me feel like, what do I do to get your attention? What can I do? And so part of that was I have to be the most perfect person in the world to get that attention. And I also realized kind of recently that I was pining for my sister's attention as well. So where my mom wasn't there, my older sister was. I also learned since my father passed away that my mom was absent in my infancy for at least a year and a half. That is a very, very long time for an infant to be away from their mother, especially at this very critical time of their rearing. So I know that there was definitely some fallout from that. And having this kind of false idea in my head, not only I only know survival. And at that point, I didn't know that that's what I was feeling. And then also the weight of the world of feeling like I have to be perfect. I can't, I don't want to do anything that's going to rock the boat more than it's already rocked. And, like I said, puberty, you get into high school. In high school, I had a soccer injury, and I ended up having to get surgery. When you talk about, adding insult to injury, my high school at the time was going through tremendous construction. So the only available floor in the main building that was able to be accessed that whole year was the basement, which only included the library, a few classrooms, and the cafeteria and the art room. And then every other class that was held on the 2 floors above it were actually held in double wide trailers in the parking lot. And then we had a separate building, a 3-story building, a very old building, so there are no elevators or anything in it. The nature of the surgery that I had, my doctor recommended and really pushed that I not use stairs. So unfortunately, where does that put you in the middle of winter? It puts you inside. You can't go crutching around outside on the ice and the snow. I could make it to the parking lot for those classes, but I couldn't make it to any of my classes in the 3-story building. There was a lot of problems with that, with the school and how teachers were not really participating and keeping me involved in the work. But that being said, that was the trigger event for me that started my journey with psychiatric care.
Mm-hmm.
I was incredibly depressed. I wasn't eating. I felt like just a shell.
Mm-hmm.
And luckily my mom, with her experience with these things, she really was looking out for me. And she said, Eilaina, I think you need to go see somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm glad that she was there and that she pushed me to do that, because if I don't know where I would be, right? If I was still stuck in that same headspace as I was back then.
Yeah.
But it really, that certainly empowered me, which caused me again to question things, which put that divide further between my mom and I and myself and the family, and just the dynamics that were perpetuated. My mom kind of pinned my sister and her against my father and I. She had this idea that my father was the causation for a lot of things that weren't really true. I can't really speak for her reality and for what she experienced, but I can say from my experience, what I observed, that they weren't always incredibly true or true at all. And so that really, really enforced that separation. And so when we say dysfunction, I mean dysfunction. And I say that laughing now because it's not a good thing, but you almost kind of got to laugh when you say, man, I'm glad I got out of it. And it took my dad passing for a lot of these things to come to fruition in a way that I don't want to say can digest them, but to be able to look back. Hindsight's always 20/20. I think once you get to your late 20s, automatically you're already going to be thinking about, your upbringing and your childhood and questioning those things. It just so happened that at 27, my father died, and I didn't get that chance to even go through and address with the family the problems or trying to work through it with them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's I was so lucky to have had so much time with my dad. And like I said, through that, we were able to get really close. It was very tumultuous. I think as when my sister left for college was the first time that I was in the house alone with my mom and my dad. My mom and my dad never really in the same room or really communicated. I feel like the only time that you could bet that my mom and dad were together would be on Christmas night, or whenever my mom decided she wanted to participate, in the family Christmas things.
Right.
So it's, there was definitely not functional in any way, learning that, one of the things I really saw was breaking down our family was a lack of communication or a lack of understanding. And even if it's that, it's an unwillingness to want to understand. And for years, I would really think about that, why are these two entities so opposite? Why do they just keep repelling each other? And what really it came down to is that, my mom believed her reality, and my dad was too stubborn to want to try to bend over backwards to communicate with my mom and her level. And so there's a lot that you can learn and you can take from that. I mentioned earlier that I have terrible self-esteem and self-confidence, and it comes directly from that. And that's not a woe is me, oh, I'm a victim. That's hey, I know now what I need to improve on.
Yeah.
And I think you're definitely forced into lessons and forced into things that kids should not, have to face. No kid should have to be told that they and understand that they weren't wanted. Even if it was just said out of anger. And I'm not saying that's personally the case. I'm just saying that, there's plenty things that are so important when it comes to those developing those kind of self-regulating skills. So I'm very, again, I keep going back to being lucky, because I know that there are a lot of people out there that maybe be struggling with some things and they don't even realize that they're struggling, or, maybe are in a situation that it's hard to be able to see a perspective outside of where they're stuck or where they're at. So, it really, I feel that the only time that you can really have a good ability to kind of take a step back and look at things for what they really are is when you remove yourself physically from that situation.
Yeah.
And it will take time. Your brain's going to be trying to make sense of things that don't make sense. And really that distance and pulling yourself out of the fire, can really take a step back and look that maybe that fire isn't this burning, bonfire. It must be just, like a little ember on the ground, but you really don't know until you can come out of it. And everyone's experience is unique, and the thing about hard is that it's relative.
Mm-hmm.
Hard is relative. My hard is not the same as your hard. Your hard is not the same as your neighbor's hard. And I think there's also a level of compassion. Some people can handle some really, really heavy stuff, but when it comes to the little things, and I can say that personally, I've been through the ringer. I've been through a lot. I'm a survivor, and I'm not a victim. I'm a survivor.
Yeah,
and
big difference.
A huge difference.
Yeah.
And not only is that, something that you really have to believe in yourself, but it's also, I think, what really kind of sets the tone for how we can give back. I feel that a lot of people that have gone through struggles or tremendous adversity are much more willing to reach out and want to share, their, not only their coping mechanisms, but want to share to help others. So everyone's, going to have a different opinion. Some advice may end up completely mute to some people, but if you can catch that one person where it just opens their mind up, maybe in a way, because you never know what other people are going through. I love smiling at strangers. I really do. And it's almost like it's a really inadvertent, response. But I think a lot of that does come from the fact, and I've been really happy that my personality is one that I'm a serial optimist, but I've certainly been plagued with a lot of trials and tribulations that would challenge that optimism.
Yeah.
Again, I hate talking about myself so much. It's a little strange, but it's also, something that I have to learn to be proud about.
Yeah. Well, and again, if there were a theme to this conversation, and there is, and it's subtle, and I'm sure people who are listening can pick it up and understand it, is that it's about human stories. And, there's a spectrum there. It's sort of people who have been through horrible things with bad families, and there's people who've had good. I was telling you, I was reading those books on psychology, and and I love these sort of case studies. He was talking about a patient of his that actually was a patient coming to his group, his little gaggle of psychologists, and she was presenting depression and anxiety concomitantly, and she was a freshman in college, and she had the charmed life. Her parents were fine, everything was good, but it was her personality type. And then she came out into the world, and her roommate was the trigger, and the roommate was, more on another personality type, but it was more manipulative and more domineering kind of thing, and it freaked this girl out. And so who cares? She's still, going to have negative affect. And so I enjoyed reading that, not in a sadistic Machiavellian sense, but just that it's a perspective shift, and it just allows you. And he cited things throughout the book, these different types of behaviors that arise. One was a conversation from a movie called Ordinary People. And you'll see your mother in this conversation where the son's home for a visit. The father is a passive deal maker, appeasement kind of guy. The mother is a controlling bitch and manipulative and has to be dominant. And the son is in that rebellion stage, and he grew up with this dichotomy of the passive father and the bitch mother. And so he cites dialogue word for word from the movie, and it got my blood going because it reminded me of somebody that allegedly raised me, and I'm like, I wanted to just stick an ice pick in this woman.
Right.
Just kidding, not really.
No, right?
Yeah, but you're thinking that, and
Yeah.
so anyway, but yeah, adversity can break you and adversity can make you. And there's resilience and there's anti-fragility. And I've been juggling those two and holding a tension between them because there's a huge difference. Like resilience is you get through, you survive, and you like you said, you're not a victim, you're a survivor of something. And then anti-fragility is like your immune system. If it's provoked and it becomes stronger, whatever virus hits it, it's going to be okay with that. It has the code now to fight it. And so that's an even higher aspiration and an art if you can be anti-fragile out of adversity. And God knows how you do it. I don't know. I don't have any advice for that, but I do know a little resilience. Like, in fact, after we're done recording, I would never say this. I would never tell this story in public until somebody passes away, but I could tell you a mom story that would just, you'd be like, are you effing kidding?
Yeah.
You were talking about like you were unwanted. You got that spiel. I got one for you that's funny in a sick kind of way, but anyway, I won't share it here. But I used to get the thing from my mom. She'd be like, I wanted a girl. I wanted a girl. In fact, I used to dress you and put girl stuff on you. And I'm like, why are you telling me that? I don't care.
Yeah.
Who cares? So, but that was her little Machiavellian head effort, kind of thing. And so whatever, but it never bothered me. I'm like, well, so what? You got
glad,
me.
I'm glad that it didn't, because certainly when you're in a situation, especially as a child, you're so malleable as a child. Your brain is a sponge. And, people don't realize things that you go through and experience as a child, really, they start mapping out your brain and, those mental pathways, those neural pathways. And, it seems obvious, but really you have to, when you're in a situation, again, my mom's explained to me before that, she didn't mean to say that I wasn't wanted or these things, and whether words that she picked, there was certainly narcissism and things in there. And, I could spend time, listing off all the events and all that, but really what it comes down to is that what she's projecting onto me is her problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you don't understand that as a child.
Right.
And sometimes as an adult, you don't even get it.
Yeah.
And so really, it's really, it's good to hear that as a kid, you were able to be like, oh, well, this doesn't really bother me, or, at least what you're, because that's really abnormal, especially, when, I'd say that's a really true testament to your personality, and, your qualities as a person. And, to kind of carry that further, it's, as we talked about last week, is, we, again, not to be redundant, but adversity is, I think, the conduit, for growth.
Yeah.
It really, really is. If you're happy, put it this way, if you're on a beach and you're totally happy, you've got not a care in the world. What are you going to do besides want to sit there in the sun? And of course, there's a time for relaxing, but when you really take a step back, what is it that provoked that personal improvement? What is it that provoked that thought in your mind that maybe allowed you to change your perspective on something? I'm sure that there are a lot of lessons and things that are learned without struggle.
Yeah.
But I really truly believe that being thrown into the fire, and having to navigate such a tedious and emotional and tumultuous and confusing and dangerous, situations, you really dig far deep and you find who the hell you are underneath it all.
Yeah. Yeah.
You really, really do. And, it's interesting. You mentioned that the picture of me with the log on my shoulder, the story behind that is actually, I would get to these points in my life where I thought I'm stuck. I don't know what I'm doing. I just wasn't satisfied. And I felt like, got to do something. And while I was sitting in our engineering building at Pitt, and I was just, what? This was around when mud obstacle races started to get really popular. And I said, you know what? I'm going to run the Tough Mudder by myself. And that's where that picture came from. And it was one of those kind of very spontaneous things. I knew I had 4 months to train. I was already pretty active and going to the gym, so I didn't think it was that big a deal. And I couldn't think to myself, why did I do something so spontaneously? I'm much more analytical and calculated.
Right,
I just learned to be very, reserved in that sense. I'm so glad I did it, because there is something so encouraging and freeing from not only just physical labor and using your body, but pushing yourself to a degree where you realize that you can do things then much more than you thought that you were capable of.
Yeah.
Traversing through a 10+ mile long, obstacle course covered in another 10, 11 pounds of mud and water is not really what some people will find a growth experience.
Well,
but it is, and where I couldn't give myself that kind of mental assurance that I need, or that, I'm working with, to kind of discover now, is that I could give that through my physical capabilities.
mm-hmm.
And of course, there's a difference between your mental fortitude and your physical fortitude, but they're part of this capsule.
Mm-hmm.
They have to work in synergy with one another.
Yeah.
I think some people are much stronger physically and some people are much stronger mentally. And it goes back to that, left and right brain kind of balance.
Yeah.
But, putting yourself in a situation where maybe wouldn't be considered struggle, but it's a challenge, is really, again, I think you were going to get there. I don't see any better way to give oneself the opportunity for growth.
Mm-hmm.
And not saying that some people ask for these things. I'm sure, you didn't ask to be born where you were, and I didn't ask to be born where I was, but I don't carry animosity towards that, because I look at every single thing that I've been through in my life, every tear, every headache, every argument, every fallout, it brought me exactly to this point in time that we're talking together. And it's some people say, oh, I live without regrets. It's like, oh, that's good for you, but maybe regrets are kind of another teaching mechanism.
Yeah, absolutely.
So with that, for the sake of not being repetitive, it's having that courage to put yourself into a situation that's a challenge, or maybe adversity.
Mm-hmm.
You could really open yourself up. Why stay safe? Why stay in your comfort zone? Life is too damn short. It's, and especially, I think that sometimes you have to go through a loss, when you really see how finite things are, and how, I'm sure a lot of people, who've been in car accidents or near-death experiences or whatnot, can say this as well. It's, you have to think, where are you limiting yourself by not opening yourself?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's where anti-fragility sneaks up on us, because it sounds really machismo and just really like gung-ho when you talk about anti-fragility, like, Arlie Ermy barking at you kind of thing, drill sergeant stuff. But it's not. It is the subtle treachery of life that again tests you. And then when you do a mud run or something like that, or something really challenging, that's a provocation, but it's in a reasonably safe and controlled environment. But you come out of the other side annealed. There's an annealing process, like when they're tapping iron on a anvil, that kind of thing, where you're strengthening the steel. And so absolutely. And so your childhood was an annealing process, and a gamble though, right? I mean, because like when you told me you were taking vacuum cleaners apart, I'm like, I'm glad you had an engineering mind and that your father could be there as an engineer to observe this, because that taking the vacuum cleaner apart is a good metaphor for what the F is going on in my life, right? And I know, like that Tool song, I don't know if you know Tool, but like I know the pieces fit, and you're trying to make the, reverse engineer and then re-engineer and understand the mechanisms and how, and there's so much rich symbolism in that. And I don't know if that's what you were, I'm not trying to project that on.
No.
But it speaks to a child that had that nature. So in that given intrinsic nature of yours, that you had hopefully that advantage to see the family dynamic and see who had what going on, and rather, because like you hit the nail on the head earlier, it's like children are wicks, and we have to learn language, we have to learn our place in our social structure. We have absolutely no emotional intelligence whatsoever until we're probably in our mid to late teens, and then it slowly comes on board. And then our cortical capacity comes on board at 22, so we have no self-regulation. There's nature really, it worked good in the savannas when we were
yeah.
small tribal units, but by God, I learned a new term to me the other day. It's called EU-social. EU social, and it talks about ant colonies and hives and things like that. So it's swarm intelligence, and there's also stigmergy that comes out of, but sociality is to me is a nice metaphor for a comprehensively organized social system, but it's all done instinctually, and it's all done sort of without it, swarm intelligence is this decentralized, non-organizational type of intelligence. And I look to that sometimes in wondering, how far away we are as humans from that, but nonetheless, we are eusocial in a sense that we are this global community, and whether we like it or not, we are in a deeply complex system socially and economically now, and all these different things. But I always look at that, since I discovered the word, I just think of eusocial as like not anything we want to aspire to, but just as a mechanism to bring back into the thinking, if that makes any sense.
No, it does. It certainly rings a bell in I guess you consider crowd dynamics. There's always some really funny videos. I think Impractical Jokers also did something like that, or maybe a hidden camera show, but it was what you can certainly change people's behavior in a crowd. And you can influence. I think the video that I'm recalling is there was some people sitting in a waiting room, and then everyone was in on the prank except for the one person.
Oh my God.
And so just normal, everyone just sitting. All of a sudden a bell will go off, or a bell rang, and then everybody stood up and just didn't change. And the person, looking around like, what the heck is this? And then the bell went off or done again, and they sat down. Some people, I think it took maybe an average about 3 times of this happening before these people just started doing the same thing as everybody else.
They complied. Yeah.
Yep.
Oh,
it's,
wow.
The same kind of, I guess, analogy of lemmings, and jumping off a bridge. It's we all start at the same building blocks. It's our nature and our nurture that really differentiate us. We're all pink inside. It's and that's again then in which comes the more human things like society and morals and ethics, but when you, like you said, when you think back in evolutionary in the savannah, we didn't live in a situation or a society where we needed those or that would really affect us in the long run. And I think whittling it down to the fact that we're all human, no one's a superhero. Us talking about struggle and adversity and the things that we learned, I don't want to misrepresent that. That means that there were things that I didn't learn. That means that there were things that my brain was much more focused on than maybe typically, what your normal, I would say normal, your standard, upbringing or maturity should take. And so I think that's, also the same that goes, for everybody, is that if you don't grow up or you aren't in a situation, I don't say just grow up by isolating it to childhood, but if you're not in a situation that would require, resilience or, like I said, to overcoming, the overcoming nature, you're not really, are you really exploring that humanity? And again, like you were bringing up, these terms again, forgive me if you said anti-fragility or
anti-fragility, Which the immune system is a good metaphor for that,
So I think that really kind of brings a lot of that together too, is that just because you maybe didn't grow up in a situation, or maybe you weren't presented with opportunities for personal growth, doesn't mean that you can't take those steps yourself.
Right.
But you have to want to, and that's not made for everybody. It takes all kinds of people to make up a world.
Yeah.
But I certainly, the people that aspire for more and really ask the question why, there's a lot to learn. It really is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people who did lead let's say more pro-social and positive affect childhoods are going to be naively confident. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean, they don't know better. And so they have a level of confidence and imagineering, to go back to the Disney phrase. I see it, and I see it outside of my generation, more to the younger generations, that there's just confidence that's going on there because they don't know any better. They don't know obstacles. And so conversely, you and I could probably point to having had trying childrenhoods, or whatever the plural of that would be. And there's certainly people that have far worse than what we had, but people who did lead good lives and they have a particular personality predilection or type, they have something to bring to the game. And I've seen it in young entrepreneurs in my area. They're just, what do you mean fail? Nobody told me about fail. And so there's that too, you bring that forward, and maybe they do fail, but they're probably going to be like, well, and maybe they'll deflect and say, well, it wasn't me, and so who cares? I mean, they just have that moxie to keep going. So it shows up in different ways, right? I think, so we all, and then of course we all form that collective, what did I call it? Eusocial structure. It's a neat idea, but I'm surprised the old German intellectuals in the 19th century, guys like Hegel and Marx and all these guys, didn't come up, that kind of language to talk about the utopia that they were trying to design back then. Because and actually they're talking about swarm intelligence and artificial intelligence, and so there's the 1,000 brain theory, and also using stigmergy as a mechanism or a means to understand how they can build machine learning to. I don't like the idea that they're trying to really one-to-one map us and directly correlate our uniqueness in a cognitive sense, but to just build a better calculating device. And 1,000 brains is more like microsystems ascend up in emergence to lesser. It's a collective kind of consensual iteration, like, so the next level catches all the information from that, sorts it, and then because they theorize that that's something that happens in our neuro processes, is that there's this like bottom to top kind of thing, and each level scrubs out the crappy information, gets the good information, collates it, and then passes it on to another hierarchy of thought. Where this happens in brain, I have no clue, but I was reading about it from the perspective of machine learning, and it's and actually there's a whole thing on YouTube about 1,000 brain theory and stuff like that. It's kind of interesting, but
machines are a product of our brain, aren't they?
They are. They're just a mirror.
Funny how that works, right?
It is. But I do get a little spooked when people are, and I just saw something the other day, and they're like, singularity is around the corner, and I'm like, what do you mean, Skynet? Are we talking Terminator here?
You're right.
and so to invoke Schwarzenegger, he, in the one movie he did, if it bleeds, we can kill it, and it's like, well, if it becomes autonomous, we can pull the frickin' plug, and it has to have electricity, kids. Just pull the plug. And maybe I'm really naive and I don't know the deep secrets of AI, but it just strikes me that a 12-gauge shotgun or just pulling the plug in that machine is not going to take over the world. So I think it's just people building up Isaac Asimov kind of fantasies in their heads. But it's it's fodder for the news media, I guess.
It's the new shiny toy that's getting a lot of attention right now.
It is. And it's a mirror, right? I mean, it kind of echoes our dreams and aspirations, and maybe we think, and I think we're thinking we're God, we're Prometheus or something, and we're just reinventing Genesis or whatever. So which is fine. It's part of our psychology.
It's there's definitely a further conversation to have about that. It's you can definitely open up Pandora's box on that one. But I wanted to briefly just kind of backtrack a little bit. You were mentioning that, and I want to thank you for this, because you're talking about kids kind of have this like unbridled confidence, ones that grow up in these situations, and I really appreciate that you said that. That's the first time I've actually ever heard that. And at first, I think you hear something, and when it just kind of starts to resonate, like, hey, maybe I should think about this a little more. And so that is something I'm definitely going to be pondering over, to kind of explore, because it also comes on the fact that I just have no self-confidence. But what I do have is the quite literal inability to believe that I'm going to do anything else but keep pushing forward.
Right. Well, that in itself is its own covert self-confidence. I think it's intrinsic within you. I think perhaps maybe there's just the voice that says, are you kidding? You know, there's the Eilaina inside of you that's like, come on. We were joking about the committee of you earlier, you know, and she gets dominant sometimes. And so it's just a negotiation at the table. You have to sit and just kind of work it out. But yeah, I take, not that I know anything about sociology, but it's like, I look at the baby boomer generation right after World War II. The 50s were an economic boon. And that generation, and I may have said this in our pre-talk earlier, you know, it's like they're very similar to your generation, wherein they had to their disposal an economic freedom, a social freedom that allowed them to innovate. They allowed them to, again, Imagineer, to keep flogging that Disney horse a little bit. And my generation's kind of sandwiched in between. And so we're just a continuum of that. But I think baby boomers, Xers, millennials, and now probably Z's coming online have that luxury. Whereas the people born during the Depression or prior to the Depression that lived through the Depression did not have that luxury. They were living very austere. Oh, so the Roaring 20s. Okay, there was a gap there for a few years where everybody was flying high and drinking champagne and all that, flappers, all that good stuff. But you know, like the 30s, 40s, and 50s, you know, early 50s, it kind of sucked. And then came good fortune, and we've been riding that wave ever since then. And I think in that, we find that, and it's iterative. So my parents were boomers, they raised me. I'm not arrogant, but I'm confident in that sense. Whereas somebody born in the 1920s or the teens may not have this type of mindset. And again, I think your generation has it, and the boomers certainly had it. So it just comes with a gumbo of economic and social libertarian or liberties or liberalism or whatever you want to call it, where you have the space to flourish. All outliers aside, I think it's just a general thing that's going on there. And it's a good experiment, I think, to see what our potential is. And it comes with costs, you know, there's costs, but I think in that thinking that we can see that sort of naive confidence. And I don't use naive as a derogatory term. It's just, you don't know any better, but to be confident. And then there's people like us that may have had a little bit of crucible thing, annealing that, but we still nonetheless come out and we're confident because perhaps the affordance there. So if you and I were born in 1915 and we had sort of not so good childhood, we might be a different type of character, right? We might be more groupthink. We might be more like leaning into religion or something else to help medicalize or numb us a little bit, you know, help us get through. So anyway, I'm rambling, but you know, I just have this idea that we just have that good fortune of being able to be audacious and dream and create. And that's perfect. That's the kind of commons that we should have to see what our potential is.
Absolutely.
And yeah.
Context, I think, has more to do as a collective evolution. I'm kind of pulling at words here, but you know, for instance, we can only see the world from behind these eyes, right? It, I think, goes back to Aristotle, and I could be wrong on the you know, the philosopher, but again, like, I can't confirm that we all agree it's blue, but are you seeing the same blue that I'm seeing? Right. And you know, when it really comes to you know, that idea as a whole is that nobody has the right answer. Nobody has all of the answers either way. And so when we look at things out of the context of what we see, that absence of context out of what somebody else sees is more known than what I think we know about ourselves, but we don't acknowledge it. And to kind of take that a little bit further, you know, for instance, take children that were born after 9/11. I remember pre 9/11. I remember flying. You know, I remember how great and prosperous the 90s were, and everyone was, you know, happy. You know, people were making money. You know, you'd get free food on planes. Well, I never even thought to think about what that changed for kids growing up post 9/11. And I recently was watching or learning about, you know, kids, mainly I'm just trying to understand a little bit more about social media and the dynamics and, you know, the psychology of that, just for my own personal interest. But I you know, I was listening to a younger millennial, and she was really commenting that, well, after September 11th, you know, our parents really became a lot more cautious about things.
Yeah.
And then we grew up in this kind of, with this heightened awareness or this heightened, alertness of fear, or, and then you throw in the world economy kind of taking a downturn. So even just in my lifetime, and we've experienced the same things, but at that critical point in our time, which really, really drives our development, it was a very different context than what I experienced. And, of course, what you experience or anybody else. So it's very interesting that you bring that up, because it does kind of contribute to that collective, you can see, I'm certain the majority of people had the same kind of predisposition in the 1920s that, is very different than the predisposition that people have now. But, priorities were certainly different.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you see it shows up in cinema. If you watch movies from the 20s and 30s, the humor's different. Ethics are different. So people, again, us that were in this bracket of born 1945 and late until now-ish, adult now-ish kind of stuff. Some of the stuff we look back and we're like, oh my God, that's cringy as hell. I mean, what the hell? But they had a different, it's not good or bad. It's just they were like, you have an Irish mother, it's a gallows humor, it's an Irish kind of humor, it's very cynical, it's very, I see people die every day and I'm used to it, and I'm jaded by that, but I still nonetheless have a sense of humor. So we have to, you mentioned context, we have to look backwards with a big grain of salt context thing going on there. And not try to, because I see people like, I support, activism in the sense that we all have to kind of learn to get along. And sometimes I see people retroactively going into the cancel mode of certain things. And it's like, well, put the brakes on that, because they were them, they were doing their things. And yes, it was terribly wrong. I mean, one of my heroes is John Arthur Johnson, who was a boxer, person of color. And he didn't give a crap. And he was, in racist 1920s America. And he would beat white people up, for fun, as in public boxing matches. And I thought, his attitude and his arrogance about, screw you, screw your racism and your system. One of my heroes, it's like, that's great. He was a man of his time who stood out, but he was also a wife beater. And I thought, shit, I'd found this out recently. And I'm like, that really sucks, man. But then how can I cancel? How can I be upset with him? Because he probably had an ultra violent childhood. He lived in his time as a Black man being oppressed by things that would make today's oppression look like, tiptoes through the daisies, not to minimize what's going on now. But anyway, so it's all contextual. So I use him as kind of a dramatic example. But when I found out he was a woman beater, I was like, dude, seriously, come on. But then it's like, well, who am I to judge? How can I judge that? And I can still take away from the fact that he was kind of a arrogant cuss, and he didn't care what people thought of him. I mean, he dated white women in the 1920s. That would usually get you killed, you know? But he was a big guy, and what scrawny little white guy's going, excuse me, sir, I really object to the fact that you're dating our people. It's like, he was like, I'm going to crush you, little boy. So anyway, I'm carrying on, but like, you have to take the good with the bad. I still admire his audacity, but nonetheless, I'm sorry that you had to punish women for your childhood trauma or whatever you're bringing into. So sorry that's the case.
Exactly. And I think that we all are certainly products of our environment. And to kind of carry that further is Marcus Aurelius. I mean, one of the the best Stoics, I wouldn't say the best, but one of the most prominent Stoics, and who were his writings are still extensively studied and looked into today. And he was one of the most brutal emperors.
And he knew it.
And he did. And it makes you really think, like, how can this person who is, responsible for so much pain, suffering, and death, how could he write something and produce something so poignant and transcendent? And, really, I think that, again, comes down to where many people don't always have that ability to, again, look beyond that perspective, because we understand that from the situation that we're at now. How can you be, invading countries and doing all your emperor stomping up and down, but really that was the reality of that time. And back in the 20s, that was the reality of that time. And it's interesting you said, it's beating women, kind of earlier what we were talking about is that it's projecting. You take that pain and you project it. And I can say that I've always been, one of my biggest fears is turning into my mom or my sister.
Yeah, yeah.
Mainly because you almost kind of wait for that other shoe to drop. And I've had many psychiatrists over the years explain to me that, you know, number one, with my age, it is highly unlikely that the shit's going to hit the fan at this point.
Oh,
Number,
good.
you know,
That's comforting.
it is comforting. That doesn't mean that hormones can't, you know, my mom's, I'd say that what really caused my mom to kind of flip completely was pregnancy and hormones and like things like that. Not saying that she didn't have that propensity or that disposition beforehand. You just basically like put that on the fast track with pregnancy and things like that. But you know, it's certainly, it's to the point where you know, you kind of sweat and worry. Like, I never wanted kids because I was absolutely terrified about repeating the same exact behavior that I grew up learning. And what I can say is that I'm proud of myself for taking that, for having the courage, not only to go and find a good therapist. That's number one. I mean, if you're, you know, if your neighbor is, you know, the person that you can trust and talk to, I don't think it has to be a therapist. But that being said, you know, kind of parsing through all those things and, you know, just saying like, I'm just terrified. What if I have a kid and all of a sudden I wake up the next day and I'm the same exact way as my mom? And I remember thinking about this growing up, and I vowed to myself, if that ever happens, I'm going to drive to the highest bridge that I can find and jump off. As a kid, you shouldn't be thinking about those things.
No, I can relate to that. Yeah.
You know, you don't want to repeat that. And so, you know, work with my therapist and these things, and digging up that trauma is always going to bring up the emotions that come with it. And one say my superpower is compartmentalization. I can put things away and I can leave them there, almost to the point where I kind of forget about them. And then you start to go through trauma, and then something comes up and you're like, oh, that's happened one time. Oh, wait a minute, that happened one time. But the whole moral of this is that you have to go through those questions and those uncomfortable fears, and to really pull apart, you know, and to, you know, to not only understand yourself, but to also kind of give yourself closure for what you experienced. Because maybe through that, you'll learn something in yourself that allows you to think, well, that's so similar to the action I saw out of this person, that maybe they were thinking the way that I'm thinking right now. Empathy is huge.
Oh yeah.
Empathy, and a lot of people lack empathy, and a lot of people don't have certain experiences to have empathy for, you know, people with other certain experiences. But that, you know, that being said, you know, it's a goal of mine to make sure that I address all of those things so that I don't repeat them.
Yeah.
And, you know, of course, you know, you get later on in life, the time, you know, the period in which you can actually start a family is starting to get smaller and smaller. So the pressure is kind of on, like, but in the moral of the story is that, you know, finding that method of being able to parse through those things and having that desire not to want to repeat those items are also a differentiator for people that have been through struggle. You hear, you know, and I'm not a therapist. I'd say that, you know, I know that there's a pretty high percentage of people that have been sexually abused themselves also becoming, you know, a sexual
predators.
abuser. Exactly. So, you know, when you think about, you know, again, product of your environment and projecting on what you've learned and what you're soaking up, there in comes that nurture versus nature argument.
Yeah. And it can be a combination sometimes, because we do have these, we aren't born tabula rasa. I think we come in with certain, and some parents that I've talked to say, yeah, children have their own personalities when that's built in, and you see it early, and it's that versus the environment versus, you know, how you're imprinted early on. And again, you know, you're wide open, you're wicking things up at a rapid rate, especially language. I mean, that's one of the biggest exaptive things we have as uppity primates, as I like to call us. It's uppity creatures that we are. So, you know, language is a good example of that. So
it's a human construct. Yes, you see, you know, like dolphins have experienced, or, you know, been studied to actually have their own kind of language and names for one another. When you really think about being able to communicate,
Yeah.
That's a human construct. That really is, that face to face. So it's a, it goes back again to the fact that we are all the same internally.
Yeah, no, I think we're all very generic in that regard. And I don't mean that in a negative way, and I'll bring out that funny word, use social again, that, we have that, we're in that sort of liminal space between being unique individual entities, but at the same time, and that's our provenance story. Again, we were small family units, and then we became tribes, and then we settled down, and then we got little pockets of communities that came in, and 12,000 years later, here we are, struggling, I think, with the connectivity that has occurred in the last 25 years, how to be that healthy tribe, and how to, because if you want inspiration, go watch some of these documentaries on Micronesian tribes, like in New Guinea or in the Amazon. They got their shit together. It's not perfect, and they eat weird stuff like bugs and monkeys and things, but beyond that, everybody knows their role. There's no such thing as, status or, so there's shaman and there's the matriarch or whatever, but really everybody just flows in a nice pattern. That to me is the eusociality of our species, that it can potentially be there, maybe concomitant with other ideas and things, as we are somewhat complex. But anyway, we're sneaking up on 2 hours. I almost want to think that if anybody's digging this conversation, that we could maybe stop here. But we talked about this even in our two-finger point. I worked at Disney once. Another thing. Sorry. That we can come back and do another convo, because I think even in the pre-meet we were like, because you're talking about sustainability and using your prowess with engineering and systems automation and things like that. I really want to dig into that. We touched on cannabis a little bit. You have a background in industry with that, and hydroponics and food and things like that. Oh my God, that's a whole other thing. And then we can also talk about humanity and all that other stuff too. But let's if you had a good experience here, let's do that. Maybe I can bring you back in the summer, and we'll have a part 2.
I'd love to do that.
Okay.
I think that, as I mentioned before to you, I also want your audience to know that what you're doing is incredibly important. It's facilitating the conversation around connection, and it's certainly encouraging to see that kind of work, especially speaking with somebody like you, and also realizing that there's a lot of similarities, and even if there weren't similarities, to just be able to exchange ideas, and a free flowing conversation is so important. Especially, with the consideration of tolerance. That I think that's the big thing is, to be open to ideas, you have to be tolerant of different ones.
For sure.
And I would absolutely love to come back if you'll have me.
Absolutely.
I'm really looking forward to it. I enjoy our conversations, and hopefully your audience enjoys this as well, and we can continue talking.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm going to definitely hand this off to all my different little social media platforms, and make sure that the few folks that follow me, and there's a fair number there, that they know about this conversation. And again, my vision in this is that younger persons, not just women, but I would like to think that, a younger woman who's working through stuff that we've covered in this conversation can walk away from something like this and be like, Eilaina really connected with me, in this sense, or I connected with her, or however that works, transjectively connected, like both of us connected in this sense, that they can. I always call it trajectory shifting. Like, this conversation might shift somebody, even if it's one person, I'd be totally happy.
Absolutely.
But I prefer many. But
So the journey of 1,000 miles begins with one single step.
Yes.
I'd be so happy, and I don't need to know this, but I feel like my purpose in this life is fulfilled if one person can take my experience and help it benefit their experience or shape their experience. So, I sometimes I remain a little objective rather than subjective when I talk about these things. But I'm always more than willing to go in further about, more specifics. So, we'll see what we can talk about next time.
And I'll have, you're not really hawking a book, and you're not a coach, and you're not doing anything in that regard, which I also think is really cool and refreshing, that we're just two people having a conversation, and there's a third party in the room observing the conversation. But I'll put your business website down below, and also for the YouTube, if you're interested, write a comment and I'll bring it into the second conversation. If you have a question or want to convey something to Eilaina, put it in the comment section here and I'll bring it into the next conversation. Or you can reach out if that's okay with you, Eilaina. If a young woman wants to, nothing weird, guys, just, good questions. I don't want to be the person
myself, so
okay. Good weird is good.
Do you see the ears?
Yeah, exactly. Good weird, but nothing bizarre.
No, I absolutely. There's certainly a consideration for those things, but
let's put our filters on.
Right. But no, I'm very again, thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
A pleasure. I really enjoy this time, and I'm certainly going to be following you. Once you initially reached out to me, I've been following.
Good.
So, I'm excited to see where you go. I really am.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to see, the conversations that you have. And I'm really not just saying that. It's, again, this is a genuine connection. And, to the people out there listening, this is, I'm glad that we've been able to connect with you in some way. So
amen. No, that's a wonderful way to wrap it up. So Eilaina, thank you so much. And YouTube audience, those of you who are still with us, thank you guys so much. And there will be a part 2, and you can look forward to that. So take care. And I will say goodbye to you after we stop record.
Absolutely.
2-finger point you.
Yeah.
And again, to the YouTube audience.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.